Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to another champion analysis and breakdown. Today we are covering one of my favorite characters in the Marvel canon, as well as a character that is a ton of fun to play, especially after he got reworked a few years back. You see him on your screen here, it is Punisher. I love the way that this character works, and there aren't a whole lot of changes that I would suggest to him, though there are a few things that I feel could be done a little bit better, which we'll talk about later on in the video. But of course, we do still need to talk about how he works to get a better understanding of his mechanics, so let's jump into that. After I briefly remind you to check and see if you are subscribed to the channel. If you're not, go ahead and fix that real quick. And if you find today's video helpful, interesting, and or enjoyable, make sure you hit that like button. Without further ado, let's talk about how Punisher works. So with his base abilities, he actually has quite a few to go over, both with his standard attacks as well as his special attacks that he can unleash. He has an 11% chance on any of his standard attacks to gain a 7-second Fury buff, which increases his attack power and potential. He also has a 20% chance to trigger an additional bleed on his opponents if they are already bleeding or have a bleed active. That bleed does last only 2.5 seconds, but of course with deep wounds and other synergies, you can extend the overall duration on that, and that just helps to further multiply his damage output. As a passive ability and to help bolster some of his defense, Punisher does have a flak jacket made by Microchip, which grants Punisher 4 stacks of physical resistance at the start of the fight. Each of those passive charges grant a certain degree of that physical resistance, and he will lose one of those physical resistance charges as he is struck by 8 incoming attacks. So he can take on a total of 32 attacks before that passive resistance is nullified completely. It doesn't break the character if he loses that. It is just a little bit nicer to have that off the start of every single fight. Now let's transition over and talk a little bit about Punisher's special attacks, as he has some really fun little mechanics that work there. His special one is decent and kind of difficult to evade. You have to make sure that you have the timing down very specifically, as it starts with a singular hit and then it follows up with a volley of pistol shots. And this attack has a 70% chance to inflict bleed, and that is a 70% chance on the different bullets that are shot out, which is actually quite nice. Those bleeds will last for a 6-second duration, and they're not the strongest bleeds in his kit, but they are very powerful. The Special 2 is a very different attack that you can maybe evade some of the first shots before the volley of rapid-fire bullets. The only characters that can really get away from this are characters such as Nightcrawler, who is completely intangible during his backdash animation, characters like Ghost, who can phase through the attack if you time it correctly, or characters like Hood, who has a 90% chance immunity to all projectile attacks when he is in his translucent state, as well as Tigra, who, if she is charging a heavy attack, becomes invulnerable to any projectile type attacks. So there are a couple of characters that can get away from that, but they are few and far between on this Special 2. However, upon connecting on that Special 2, Punisher does have an 85% chance to inflict a bleed, and that deals a heavier bleed damage than what is done on the Special 1, though it does last for a slightly shorter duration at that 5.5 second timer, so it does tick a little bit stronger per second, and is a decently powerful attack in its own right. However, the additional perk of this attack is when that bleed expires, it has a 65% chance to convert into an open wound. And the open wound mechanic I really enjoy, because it is really what allows Punisher to further his damage output potential. I just wish it worked a little bit differently, which again we'll touch on here in just a brief moment. Basically what that open wound does is it is a passive bleed that deals no damage, but still allows Punisher to get that benefit of the 20% chance of opening an additional bleed attack that does deal damage whenever he is attacking into his opponent. You can only ever have one open wound active on an opponent at a time, which is a little bit of a bummer. I think it would be really cool if they, touching on one of the things that I think could make this character better, I think it would be cool if you were able to stack like up to 3 or 4 of those open wounds and allow them to increase that 20% chance by a flat 20 per attack received. And that's why I only think that it should be 3 at the absolute maximum, because otherwise it's just going to get a lot more hectic and out of control. But it is at least something that could help bolster his damage output a little bit more. While we're on the same subject, I might as well go in and say the other thing that I think can be done to change the open wound bleed mechanic. I don't like the fact that it is a non-damage dealing debuff, or passive debuff. I do believe that it should stay passive, because that's really what hones in on this character, makes him a lot more unique. But I do think that it should act a little bit more closely to the way that Nick Fury's bleed works, where it will slowly tick away over time. And I'm not saying anything super strong, like maybe 10 or 15 damage for every intersecond interval that it's running, or every tick, so on the half seconds there. That's not overpowering in my opinion, especially if you don't make that alteration that I suggested with allowing multiple open wound passive debuffs to stack. That would be maybe a better way of counterbalancing it, but I would love to see either one of those adjustments made, if not both of them implemented, as I don't feel like that would be overpowering, especially with the current meta of the game and characters that can just layer in massive, absurd amounts of damage with their abilities. The Special 3 attack is quite a spectacle to behold. It looks very, very presentable, and is a very brutal attack as well. This has a 100% chance to inflict a very strong bleed. Its duration again is shorter at 5 seconds, and it has more damage than the previous bleeds off of either the previous special attacks. You also will deal more damage on the Special 3 attack depending on how low your character's health is, which really kind of makes Punisher hit very, very hard if you have him down at that 1% margin, which is possible with his signature ability, which we'll move on to here in just one brief second. But if you can manage to do that, you're going to have an insanely powerful Special 3 attack that realistically you can only use once per fight, but will really kind of drive home the point. The other benefit off of that Special 3 is it has a 90% chance for that bleed to turn into an open wound when it expires, which is certainly better than the Special 2. But either way, I think that the better route in most encounters is to go with the Special 2 damage that will be a little bit more reliable and have a better chance of you getting that open wound up earlier on in the fight, just based off of how long it takes to charge up your Special 3 attacks in this game. The last item to really touch on is the signature ability, which is Defy Pain. And this is, well, I'll just read the description of how this ability works. Marine Corps, the Vietnam War, the Italian Mafia. Frank Castle has conditioned himself for a high pain tolerance, granting him a certain percent chance to trigger an indestructible passive that lasts for 8 seconds when receiving a lethal blow. This can only trigger once per fight. I think that it would be better to change this slightly, so anytime he would die in the fight, he gets that passive indestructible. And I do like the fact that it's passive, because that means that it cannot be nullified or circumvented by a nullifier or other type of buff that would prevent an active buff from triggering. I just think that it would be better if he were to get that regardless in each fight, because currently it can be bypassed by damage dealing debuffs such as bleed, poison, cold snap, incinerate. Any of those can bypass that ability of Punisher to activate that attack, which is an interesting bit of counterplay. I just think that it would make Punisher that much more desirable to have with his signature ability unlocked if he were to have that active. And he's really a powerhouse that hits quite hard in this game, and I've really touched on any of the adjustments and changes that I'd like to see happen with his character just based off of the way that he currently is. I don't think that there's a whole lot more that you could do to make this character the best that he could possibly be. But what do you think? Do you agree with my analysis and synopsis there? Do you think that there's anything that I missed or overlooked, or do you think that I'm overthinking things? Be sure to let me know what your thoughts are in the comments down below. And thanks again for letting me take some time out of your day. Have a good one, everyone.